By 1920, even the last missing in action were declared dead, so Sweet Grandma and Catch Committee Grandpa finally could get married. The family started to grow. Grandpa became a school caretaker, and when school was out, he was a road maintenance guy. They got an apartment in the school, and also they got a small patch of land just outside the city so that they can grow their own food. Everybody worked hard, everybody contributed, everybody pitched in, and even the youngest ones had jobs. Now, never mind their exemplary work ethics, what's really remarkable about them is that no matter what crazy things life threw in their way, they dealt with it with a winning smile. They had a fantastic, positive attitude. And in times of sadness, they got each other's support. They were unstoppable. A lot of comedians are trying to entertain us, and their job nowadays is hard because real good jokes are bound to offend the snowflakes. There is the polite and controlled appropriate laughter, and then there is the out-of-control belly laugh that comes very deep from inside a person. This is the kind of laugh that feels like it's gonna rearrange your guts, and then your sides hurt and you can't stop and you're gasping for air. And when you're done, you're physically exhausted and a lot of tension leaves your system. I'm lucky if I manage one or two of these laughs a year, and it's always refreshing. Remember back then, entertainment wasn't expected to come from the media. People got creative, they made their own fun, friends and family entertained each other. Our family practiced unrestricted humor. Nothing was off limits. Good jokes, bad jokes, inappropriate jokes, dirty jokes, jokes involving gross stuff and bodily functions and personal matter, even weaknesses and disabilities. They could handle it. And of course, nothing is better than having fun with shit. My father was probably 8 or 9, Uncle Tonchi 6 or 7. They got themselves a summer job. They were delivering parcels and boxes and various bulky goods from the train station or the farmer's market to houses. They got a wooden cart that had 4 wooden wheels with steel hoops on those wheels, and the city was paved in yellow hardened paver bricks, so you can imagine the racket the steel hoops made on the pavers. They had a pair of black boxer shorts and they went barefoot. I guess they got a good suntan. The bulk of the transportation was done, of course, with horse-drawn carriages, and every once in a while even livestock was herded through the streets towards the slaughterhouse or the train station. One of these sunny summer days, my father spotted a nice, fresh plop of cow dung on the pavers, and he steered the cart over it, and Uncle Tonchi, who was pushing the cart from behind, stepped in it with both feet. The little guy was hopping mad, and my father laughed hysterically as the soft material oozed through Uncle Tonchi's toes. And I guess the secondary fun was to see how the desperate little guy was trying to clean himself. Like, how do you clean yourself in the middle of the city? What do you wipe the smelly stuff on? There's no water or paper towels. But the little guy was smart. He didn't immediately retaliate. He vowed revenge, but he kept it to himself. And one day he volunteered to pull the cart. My father perhaps thought that the little guy has long forgotten the humiliation. And of course Uncle Tonchi spotted a nice heap of horse shit. He steered the cart over it, and my father told me that he kicked into the heap first. It scattered the balls of horse shit, and then of course he stepped in them. Uncle Tonchi had his laugh. He said, "I got you back." But more than this, he managed to establish himself as an equal in the pecking order. In November 1944, as the Russian front approached Kecskemét, the Germans made a decision that the city was not strategically important enough to fight for. They just left and dug in on the other side of the city. They were trying to halt the Russian advance with their artillery. So the Russians were on one side, Germans on the other side. The Germans had some Jewish slave laborers, and they used Grandpa's school as a prison. As they were leaving, they put some Hungarian soldiers in charge of guarding them. And of course, the minute they were gone, the Hungarian soldiers disappeared. So the prisoners were essentially free, but where to go? If they walked towards the Russian lines, they could be mowed down. If the Germans pushed back, they could be rounded up and marched towards the west. Anyhow, by the evening, they were nowhere to be seen. My Uncle Frank saw that Grandpa was up to something. He gathered bricks and mixed mortar and shoveled coal in his road maintenance cart. Well, Grandpa hid the Jews in an abandoned house very close to the school. He found a nook in the basement and he walled them in. He built a wall and covered the fresh construction with a pile of coal against it. Well, the front stalled badly. This arrangement was good probably for a day or two, but the Russians needed more than 4 days to come into the city and establish themselves. Well, Grandpa immediately tore down the wall, and 19 of them crawled to safety in horrible shape. One unfortunately died. But eventually, after the war, the survivors told their story. But to this day, nobody has an idea about the identity of the righteous Gentile who saved their lives. War creates a lot of confusion. People try to make good decisions based on bad information. Somebody in the family had the brilliant idea that they should go up to Budapest. Aunt Ethel has a little house there in the suburbs. Maybe they would be safer there. It turned out to be an extremely bad move because the siege of Budapest was one of the nastiest sieges of the Second World War. They were hunkering down in Aunt Ethel's freezing cold cellar. There was no food. They were eating cabbages for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And the boys occasionally, during lulls of the fighting, ventured out to scavenge for food. Mostly they were trying to cut flesh from dead horses that littered the streets. Tóth Erzsébet, my father's grandma, was sitting in an armchair for 3 weeks, only getting up when she needed to go to the bucket. So it was pretty miserable. Now, eventually the Russians pushed to the line of the Danube, so the fighting died down in the suburbs, and here comes the amazing part of the story. I told you the Kecskeméti boys were creative problem solvers and born risk takers. Somehow they linked up with a mechanic who knew about an abandoned locomotive in one of the marshalling yards, and according to him it was a functional locomotive, it just needed to be fired up. So the family went out to the marshalling yard, they got in the locomotive, the mechanic fired it up, they got the steam going, and they essentially stole the locomotive. Now, the adults were asked to sit on the floor, the steel floor of the cab, and the kids were packed up on shelves and ledges and on the edges of the boiler. And my father says that it was stifling hot up there, and they took their clothes off, and they were sweating buckets, and the adults on the floor of the cab were shivering and freezing to death. Now, my father says that the hilarious thing was for him that the normally very religious and serene grandma finally flipped out and started profusely cursing the boys because she believed that the boys were just teasing her as she was shivering down on the floor. The rail line was intact. No marauding Soviet fighter planes strafed this runaway locomotive. And in 2 hours, they got home and they were safe and sound. Amazing. Now the family had to come to terms with their new reality, life with the Ruskies. It started with a heartrending tragedy. Uncle Lotzi was a junior soldier. The junior soldiers were like 15, 16-year-old kids. They didn't get weapons training, they weren't armed, they just helped out with chores in the army. They had a uniform and unfortunately they looked like child soldiers. As they were pushed west, he tried to slip away. Local villagers gave him civilian clothes, but the Russians caught him and beat him to death with the butts of their rifles. It was a senseless killing. The villagers buried him, and sweet grandma was able to visit her son's grave about a year after the war. It was so traumatic for her that this was her first and only visit. Then she just blocked it out. In the meantime, the Russians were busy making alterations to the schoolhouse. They dug an open ditch right across the schoolyard, and they had a partition, and they used the west side as a latrine, an open ditch for human waste, and the other side for slaughterhouse waste. They used the other side of the school building as a slaughterhouse. The animals, pigs, sheep, cows, whatever they acquired in the farmland were slaughtered there, and they also had no hesitation, or shall we say they were very comfortable with the concept of forced labor. Guess who were forced to do the slaughterhouse chores? none other than the Kecskeméti boys. The ringleader, Uncle Sanyi, made sure that as the carcasses were hanged on butcher's hooks to be halved and the entrails cleaned out, he cleaned out all the good internal organs together with the guts. And as they were taking the guts to the dump site, they quickly separated the kidneys, the hearts, the livers, stuffed the warm, bloody, juicy organs into their coat pockets, and they took it home in the evening to feed the hungry mouths. Now, one day, the ever-inquisitive and fun-loving father of mine ventured on the other side, and he discovered these discarded cow tails, and they were probably fascinating. They were like whips. He kept one for himself, and in the evening, as Tóth Erzsébet, yes, the beloved grandma Tóth Erzsébet, was sitting on the latrine, he lurked on the other side and whacked grandma's butt with the cow tail. Then, later at dinner, my father loudly complained how these barbarian Ruskis were harassing him and whacking his butt with something on the latrine. And then Grandma chimed in, yes, it happened to her too. And then the two of them agreed that these Ruskis were bad. Days later, on a square very close to the school, a Russian soldier was trying to take a woman's bicycle. Now, the Russians were grabbing people. Many of them ended up in Siberia, in the gulags, as forced laborers. They weren't shy to take souvenirs for themselves, and they grabbed women too. The statistics are horrendous. The woman was screaming and clinging to her bike because the bike wasn't for sport purposes. It was a vital link between the farmland and the city. A silent crowd surrounded the scene, but nobody dared to intervene because the Russian had a Kalashnikov dangling on his shoulder. Kecskeméti Grandpa, on his wooden leg, hobbled close, and with one mighty blow, he punched out the Russian cold. The crowd disappeared. Can you imagine if Grandpa doesn't get that blow right and the mad Russian starts shooting? So I'm glad he got it right. A couple of days later, as Grandpa was filling potholes in the road, a Russian truck driver ran him over, killing him instantly. Now, it's true that Grandpa needed more time to hobble out of the way on his wooden leg, but it is also a sad fact that some messed up and angry Russians killed civilians on purpose for the fun of it. We will never know. So Uncle Lutzi was gone. The hero Grandpa was dead. One more person was missing, Uncle Lajos. Nobody knew where he was. But one day, he just walked home from the train station, and as my father put it, he was fattened up. He was released from American captivity, and his bag was full of American chocolate that he brought home for his brothers. Under Soviet occupation, the era of a violently repressive and insane Stalinist regime was dawning. It was a decade of nightmare. But so it happens that these years were the golden years of our family. You'll see it in the next episode.